The thunderous crack of a gunshot shattered the late afternoon calm of Silver Creek, Wyoming Territory, in 1878, sending Dahlia Atwood sprinting down the dusty main street with her heart hammering against her ribs. Her copper-colored hair had come loose from its pins, streaming behind her like a banner as she clutched her medical bag close to her chest. As the town's only female doctor, one of the few in the entire territory, she'd grown accustomed to being summoned for emergencies. But the urgency in young Tommy Fletcher's voice when he'd burst into her office had sent a chill down her spine. "Doc Atwood, come quick." "There's been a shootout at the Silver Dollar." Dahlia rounded the corner, her boots kicking up clouds of dust. The crowd that had gathered outside the saloon parted for her, murmuring respectfully. At 26, she'd earned their grudging respect through 3 years of determined service after medical school in Boston. Still, she could feel the weight of their stares, some curious, some disapproving of a woman in her position. "Make way," she commanded, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "Let me through." The parting crowd revealed a man sprawled in the dirt, blood seeping through his shirt just below his left shoulder. Kneeling beside him was another man she hadn't seen before, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His hands pressed firmly against the wounded man's shoulder, stemming the flow of blood. "He's losing too much blood," the stranger said, his voice a deep rumble that matched his rugged appearance. His gaze locked with hers, and something indefinable passed between them. "You the doctor?" Dahlia nodded, dropping to her knees opposite him. "Dahlia Atwood, and you are?" "Lucas Thornton," he replied, shifting to give her better access to the injured man. "Just passing through. Your sheriff might want to know the fella who did this took off heading north." Dahlia quickly assessed the wound. "The bullet passed through cleanly. We need to get him to my clinic." She glanced up at the gathering crowd. "I need volunteers to carry him, carefully." 4 men stepped forward, and under Dahlia's directions, they lifted the wounded man. As they made their way toward her clinic at the end of the street, Lucas fell into step beside her. "You're handy in a crisis, Mr. Thornton," she observed, studying him from the corner of her eye. His clothes marked him as a cowboy, worn leather chaps over denim trousers, a dusty cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal powerful forearms, and a weathered Stetson pulled low over his brow. "Seen my share of gunshot wounds," he replied, matching her brisk pace. "Served with the Union Army, Medical Corps." That explained his calm competence. "You have medical training, field medicine mostly, nothing like your education, I'd wager." Dahlia pushed open the door to her clinic, directing the men to place the wounded man on the examination table in the center of the room. "Everyone out except Mr. Thornton," she ordered, already rolling up her sleeves. Once alone with her patient and Lucas, she worked swiftly, cleaning and disinfecting the wound before stitching it closed with neat, precise sutures. Lucas assisted without being asked, anticipating her needs and handing her instruments before she had to request them. "Your hands are steady," she remarked as she tied off the final stitch. "You would have made a fine surgeon." "War taught me steady hands," he said, a shadow crossing his features. "Among other things." The wounded man, whom she now recognized as Pete Sullivan, a local ranch hand, stirred and groaned. Dahlia administered laudanum for the pain, and once he'd fallen into a drug-induced sleep, she turned to wash her hands in the basin. "He'll live," she said, drying her hands on a clean towel. "Thanks in part to your quick action." Lucas shrugged, his broad shoulders rising and falling beneath his shirt. "Just did what needed doing." He glanced out the window where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and reds. "I should see about finding a room for the night. The hotel across from the station is clean and reasonably priced," Dahlia offered. "Or Mrs. Wilkins runs a boarding house 2 streets over that serves the best breakfast in the territory." Lucas nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "Much obliged, Dr. Atwood." He paused at the door. I reckon I'll see you around town before I move on. Are you staying long?" The question escaped before Dahlia could stop herself. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Hadn't planned on it, but plans have a way of changing. With that enigmatic statement hanging in the air, he tipped his hat and stepped out into the gathering dusk, leaving Dahlia staring after him with an inexplicable flutter in her chest. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with a crisp autumn breeze that promised winter wasn't far behind. Dahlia arrived at her clinic early, as was her habit, to check on Pete Sullivan. She found him awake and grumbling about the pain, which she took as a good sign. "Morning, Doc," he managed, attempting to sit up before wincing and thinking better of it. "Reckon I owe you my life." "You owe me $6 for the treatment, and you owe yourself the sense to stay away from card games with strangers," she replied, checking his bandages with gentle fingers. "The wound looks clean, no signs of infection. You're lucky." "Luckier than I deserved," Pete admitted. "That stranger, the one who helped you, he's the one who called out Jenkins for cheating, if he hadn't been there." He trailed off, the implication clear. Dahlia frowned. "So Mr. Thornton intervened in a card game dispute that wasn't his concern?" "Yes, madam." Jenkins had an ace up his sleeve, plain as day. Thornton called him on it. Things got heated. Jenkins drew on me instead of Thornton, I reckon, because I was an easier target. Thornton knocked his arm, or I'd be stone dead instead of just winged. This new information intrigued Dahlia. Lucas Thornton was becoming more interesting by the minute, a man who would risk himself to prevent a cheater from taking advantage of others, and then stay to help the wounded. Not the typical drifter passing through Silver Creek. After giving Pete instructions to rest and arranging for him to be transported to his room at the boarding house later that day, Dahlia stepped outside to find Lucas Thornton himself leaning against the hitching post in front of her clinic. "Mr. Thornton," she greeted, surprise coloring her voice. "What brings you by? Thought I'd check on your patient," he said, straightening to his full height, a good head taller than she was. "And I brought you this." He held out a paper-wrapped package that emitted a tantalizing aroma. "Fresh bread from the bakery. Figured you might not have had time for breakfast." The thoughtful gesture caught her off guard. "That's very kind of you," he shrugged, a hint of embarrassment in the gesture. "Least I could do. You saved that man's life yesterday." "We both did," she corrected, accepting the package. "Pete told me what happened at the saloon. That was brave of you, confronting a card cheat." "Wasn't bravery so much as a dislike for liars and thieves," Lucas replied, his expression hardening momentarily before softening as he looked at her. "Besides, seemed like the right thing to do." Dahlia studied him with new interest. "Well, Mr. Thornton, it appears Silver Creek owes you a debt of gratitude. How long do you plan to stay in our town?" "Call me Lucas," he said, then hesitated. "And I'm not sure. I was heading to Montana, looking for work on one of the big cattle outfits up there, but..." He glanced around the bustling Main Street. "This seems like a decent place." "It is," Dahlia agreed, "though we have our share of troubles like anywhere." She unwrapped the bread, breaking off a piece and offering some to him. "What kind of work are you looking for specifically?" Lucas accepted the bread with a nod of thanks. "I've been working cattle since the war, good with horses, not afraid of hard work." "The Mason spread north of town is always looking for experienced hands," Dahlia suggested. "And they pay fair wages, unlike some outfits around here." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Dawson, a stocky man with a salt and pepper mustache and a perpetually serious expression. "Dr. Atwood," he nodded respectfully, then turned his attention to Lucas. "You must be Thornton. Heard about what happened at the Silver Dollar. Wanted to thank you for stepping in. Jenkins has been causing trouble since he drifted into town last month." "Did you catch him?" Lucas asked. The sheriff shook his head. "Not yet, got men looking, he won't get far." He sized Lucas up with a practiced eye. "You sticking around?" "Could use a statement about what happened." "I'll be here," Lucas confirmed. "Was just telling the doctor I might look for work at the Mason Ranch." "Old man Mason would be lucky to have you," the sheriff said. "Stop by my office when you have a chance." With a tip of his hat to Dahlia, he continued down the street. Lucas turned back to Dahlia, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Seems like a good lawman." "He is," Dahlia agreed. "One of the reasons Silver Creek is safer than most frontier towns." She hesitated, then added, "If you're serious about staying, there's a social at the church this Sunday. Good way to meet folks in town." The invitation surprised even her. She rarely attended such functions herself, too busy with her practice and too aware of the sidelong glances from those who still hadn't reconciled themselves to a female physician. Lucas's storm-gray eyes studied her face, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Is that an invitation, Dr. Atwood?" Dahlia felt a flush creeping up her neck. "A suggestion, Mr. Thornton, for your benefit should you wish to establish yourself here." "Dahlia," he said, her name rolling off his tongue like something precious. "If we're to be neighbors, perhaps you could call me Lucas." The sound of her given name on his lips sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Very well, Lucas," he grinned then, a full, genuine smile that transformed his rugged features and made her heart skip a beat. "Then I accept your suggestion. Perhaps you might point me in the direction of the Mason Ranch now." Dahlia gave him directions, watching as he mounted a magnificent chestnut gelding that stood patiently nearby. He sat the horse with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. "I hope to see you Sunday, Dahlia," he called as he turned his horse toward the northern road. She raised a hand in farewell, telling herself the warmth in her cheeks was merely the morning sun and not the lingering effect of his smile. By Sunday, it seemed the entire town knew that Lucas Thornton had been hired at the Mason Ranch. Dahlia heard the news from several patients, along with various embellishments about his confrontation with Jenkins, who remained at large despite the sheriff's efforts. The church social was more crowded than usual, the ladies of Silver Creek having apparently gotten wind of the handsome new cowboy in town. Dahlia arrived late, having been delayed by a difficult birth at the Peterson farm. She'd changed hastily into her best blue dress, but she knew she looked tired and windblown as she slipped into the church hall. Her eyes found Lucas immediately. He stood head and shoulders above most of the men, his dark hair neatly combed, wearing clean trousers and a pressed shirt. He was surrounded by a cluster of young women, including the mayor's daughter, Sophia Green, who was widely regarded as the prettiest girl in the county. Something that felt suspiciously like jealousy flickered in Dahlia's chest. She pushed it aside, greeting several patients as she made her way to the refreshment table. She had just accepted a cup of punch from Mrs. Wilson when a familiar deep voice spoke from behind her. "I was beginning to think you weren't coming." Dahlia turned to find Lucas standing there, a warm smile lighting his eyes. "I was called out to the Peterson farm. Mrs. Peterson had her baby a healthy boy." "Congratulations are in order then," he said. "For the family and the doctor. It's always a relief when things go well," she admitted. "Not all births are so straightforward." Lucas nodded, understanding in his expression. "I imagine your work is often difficult, yet you chose it anyway." "I did," Dahlia agreed, surprised by his perception. Most men didn't consider the challenges of her profession beyond their own discomfort with the idea of a female doctor. "Medicine has always fascinated me. My father was a doctor in Boston. He encouraged my interest, even when others thought it unseemly." "He sounds like a wise man," Lucas said, guiding her toward a quieter corner of the hall. "Is he still practicing in Boston?" A shadow crossed Dahlia's face. "No, he passed away 5 years ago, influenza. That's partly why I came west, too many memories there." Lucas's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss. Losing family leaves a hole nothing quite fills." "You speak from experience," Dahlia observed. He nodded, his gaze distant for a moment. "Lost my parents to cholera when I was 16, then my older brother in the war." "I'm sorry," Dahlia said softly. "Is there other family, a younger sister in St. Louis, married with 2 little ones?" A fond smile touched his lips. "She writes regular, keeps trying to convince me to settle down near them." And yet you're heading to Montana instead, Dahlia noted. Lucas shrugged. Never been one for city living, need open spaces, room to breathe. He glanced around the crowded church hall. Though a town this size might be a good compromise. Before Dahlia could respond, the music started a lively fiddle tune that had couples quickly forming for a dance. Lucas looked at her, a question in his eyes. Would you care to dance, Dr. Atwood? Dahlia hesitated. She rarely danced at these functions, usually too tired from work or too conscious of her position in the community. But something in Lucas's steady gaze made her set aside her usual reservations. I would, Mr. Thornton, she replied, placing her hand in his outstretched one. Though I should warn you, I'm out of practice. His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused. Then we'll learn together. As it turned out, Lucas was a surprisingly graceful dancer despite his size. He guided her through the steps with confidence, his hand respectfully at her waist, maintaining a proper distance between them even as other couples brushed shoulders and laughed. You dance well for a cowboy, Dahlia remarked as they turned with the music. A chuckle rumbled from his chest. My mother insisted her children learn, said it was a civilized skill even for boys destined for hard work. She was right, Dahlia smiled. Though I imagine it's not often useful on cattle drives. More useful than you might think, he countered with a wink. Won $5 once entertaining a trail crew with a solo performance after too much whiskey. The image of Lucas dancing alone for a group of rowdy cowboys made Dahlia laugh out loud, a bright, clear sound that turned heads nearby. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that in public. It felt freeing, like shedding a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. The evening continued pleasantly, with Lucas staying by her side despite the obvious interest from other young women. They danced twice more, and in between, he introduced her to some of the ranch hands from Mason's spread who'd come to town for the social. As the gathering wound down, Lucas offered to walk her home. The night was clear and cool, stars sprinkled across the sky like diamond dust on black velvet. They strolled in comfortable silence for a while, their breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. I wanted to thank you, Lucas said finally as they approached her small house behind the clinic. For what? Dahlia asked, glancing up at him. For suggesting I try Mason's ranch. It's good work with good people, and for introducing me around tonight. Makes a place feel less strange when you know a few names and faces. They reached her front porch, and Dahlia turned to face him. You're welcome, though I suspect you would have managed fine without my help. You seem to make friends easily. Lucas shook his head. Not really. I've spent most of the last decade keeping to myself. It's easier that way, usually. He looked down at her, his expression serious in the moonlight. But sometimes a person comes along that makes you want to try harder. The implication of his words hung in the air between them, making Dahlia's heart beat faster. She wasn't naive, she recognized the interest in his eyes. But she'd learned long ago that her profession and independence came at a price. Most men couldn't reconcile themselves to a wife who dealt with the messy realities of medicine, who kept irregular hours, who sometimes placed her patients' needs above domestic concerns. Lucas, she began carefully, I think you should know that I'm not what most men are looking for in a woman. He stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. I'm not most men, Dahlia, and I'm not looking for most women. The directness of his response left her momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a reply, he took a step back, respecting her space. I'd like to call on you properly if you'll allow it, he said. Sunday dinner next week, perhaps? Dahlia found herself nodding before she'd fully considered the implications. Yes, I'd like that. A smile spread across his face, genuine and warm. Until then. He tipped his hat and turned to leave, his long strides carrying him back toward the main street where he'd stabled his horse. Dahlia watched him go, an unfamiliar flutter of anticipation in her chest. It had been a long time since she'd allowed herself to think of anything beyond her practice. Lucas Thornton was disrupting her carefully ordered life, and she wasn't entirely sure that was a bad thing. The following week passed in a blur of activity. A minor outbreak of influenza kept Dahlia busy, while Lucas settled into his work at the Mason Ranch. He found excuses to come into town several times, stopping by her clinic with small offerings, fresh eggs from the ranch, wildflowers he'd picked along the road, once even a book of poetry he'd found at the general store. Each visit was brief but meaningful, allowing them to learn more about each other in the stolen moments between her patients and his duties. She discovered his fondness for blackberry pie, his habit of whittling small wooden figures when his hands needed occupation, his deep knowledge of horses that went beyond mere professional skill. He learned about her passion for new medical journals, her weakness for peppermint candy, her ongoing battle to be taken seriously by some of the more traditional residents of Silver Creek. By the time Sunday arrived, Dahlia realized with some surprise that she was genuinely looking forward to spending an uninterrupted afternoon in Lucas's company. She wore her second-best dress, a forest green that brought out the copper highlights in her hair, and fussed more than usual with her appearance. Lucas arrived precisely at noon, riding his chestnut gelding and leading a gentle-looking mare for Dahlia. He'd planned a picnic by the creek that gave the town its name, a spot known for its beauty and privacy. "You look lovely," he said as he helped her mount the mare, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The compliment brought a flush to Dahlia's cheeks. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself." It was true he'd clearly made an effort, wearing a new shirt and with his dark hair neatly trimmed. They rode at a leisurely pace, the October sunshine warm on their backs despite the crisp air. Lucas pointed out landmarks as they went, sharing stories about the territory that he'd learned from the other ranch hands. Dahlia found herself relaxing in his company, the constant tension she carried in her shoulders easing as they left the town behind. The spot Lucas had chosen for their picnic was perfect, a grassy bank beside the creek, sheltered by cottonwood trees whose leaves had turned golden with the season. He spread a blanket and unpacked a surprisingly elaborate meal: cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese, apples, and even a small jar of preserves. "Did you prepare all this yourself?" Dahlia asked, impressed. Lucas grinned. "The cook at the ranch took pity on me when I explained my plans. She insisted on helping, said I'd never win a lady's heart with my own cooking." "And is that your intention, Lucas, to win my heart?" The question slipped out before Dahlia could censor herself, more direct than she'd intended. Instead of being flustered, Lucas met her gaze steadily. "Yes," he said simply, "if you'll allow it." His honesty took her breath away. Most men she'd known played games, hid their intentions, or assumed her interest. Lucas's straightforward approach was refreshing and terrifying. "You hardly know me," she said. "I know enough," he countered. "I know you're brilliant and dedicated. I know you're kind but not soft. I know you've faced opposition and prevailed. I know your hands can be both gentle with a newborn and steady with a scalpel." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "And I know I've thought about you every day since we met." Dahlia's heart hammered in her chest. "Lucas, my life is complicated. My work comes first. It has to. I've seen too many women forced to choose between their dreams and a man's expectations." "I would never ask you to choose," Lucas said firmly. "Your work is part of who you are." "Why would I want to change that?" "Most men would," Dahlia pointed out. "As I said before, I'm not most men." His expression softened. "My mother was a midwife before she married my father. She gave it up because he couldn't accept her leaving at all hours to help bring new life into the world. She never complained, but I saw how it dimmed something in her." He reached across the blanket, his fingers brushing hers. "I wouldn't do that to you, Dahlia, not ever." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. For years, she'd convinced herself that her choice of profession meant a life alone. The possibility that it might not be true was almost too much to hope for. "Let's start with today," she suggested, turning her hand to clasp his briefly before reaching for the bread. "One day at a time." Lucas smiled, accepting her caution. One day at a time, he agreed. The afternoon passed pleasantly, their conversation flowing easily from serious topics to lighter ones. Lucas told her about his experiences during the war, serving as a field medic despite his lack of formal training, and how those experiences had shaped his view of life and death. Dahlia shared stories of her struggles through medical school, the professors who'd tried to discourage her, and the few who'd recognized her talent and nurtured it. They were so engrossed in their conversation that they almost missed the approaching riders until it was too late. The sound of hoofbeats made them both look up sharply. 3 men on horseback were approaching fast, and Dahlia felt Lucas tense beside her. "Get behind me," he said quietly, rising to his feet in one fluid motion. Dahlia recognized the lead rider with a jolt of alarm: Jenkins, the card cheat who'd shot Pete Sullivan and fled town. The 2 men with him were strangers, rough-looking characters with hard eyes and hands hovering near their guns. "Well, well," Jenkins called as they drew closer. "If it ain't the hero Cowboy who stuck his nose where it didn't belong." His gaze shifted to Dahlia, and a nasty smile spread across his face. "And the lady doctor, too. Ain't this cozy?" Lucas stood his ground, his posture deceptively casual, though Dahlia could see the readiness in his stance. "You're making a mistake coming back here, Jenkins. Sheriff has a warrant out for you." Jenkins spat on the ground. "Sheriff ain't here now, is he? Just you, me, my friends here, and the pretty doctor." His eyes narrowed. "You cost me money and reputation, Thornton. I aim to settle that debt." "The only debt was yours," Lucas replied evenly. "You were cheating at cards and got caught. Take your friends and ride on. This doesn't need to get ugly." The other 2 men spread out slightly, flanking Jenkins. One of them, a wiry man with a pockmarked face, snickered. "Already got ugly when you stuck your nose in our business in town," he said. "Boss has been planning this little reunion since you called him out." Dahlia's mind raced. They were too far from town for anyone to hear if they called for help. Lucas was unarmed, his revolver was in his saddlebag, and the horses had wandered several yards away to graze. She had a small derringer in her medical bag, but it was behind Lucas on the blanket, and she wasn't sure she could reach it without being noticed. Jenkins dismounted, followed by his companions. "Here's how this is going to go," he drawled. "We're going to teach you a lesson about minding your own business. Then maybe we'll have some fun with the lady doctor before we head back to the Montana Territory." Lucas's expression hardened. "You won't touch her. And who's going to stop us?" "You," Jenkins laughed. 3 against 1, and we're armed." He drew his revolver with practiced ease, pointing it at Lucas's chest. "Now, are you going to be smart and take your beating, or do I need to put a bullet in you first?" Dahlia stepped out from behind Lucas, ignoring his attempt to keep her back. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, her voice remarkably steady despite her fear, "Sheriff Dawson and his deputies are expecting us back in town. If we don't return, they'll come looking." "Nice try, Doc," Jenkins sneered. "But we watched you 2 ride out. Nobody's expecting you anytime soon." He gestured with his gun. "Step aside, lady. This is between me and him." "No," Dahlia said firmly. "If you want him, you'll have to go through me first." Jenkins's face darkened with anger. "That can be arranged." What happened next occurred so quickly that Dahlia could barely follow it. As Jenkins took a menacing step forward, Lucas moved with explosive speed. He lunged forward, closing the distance between himself and Jenkins before the man could react. His right hand clamped around Jenkins's wrist, forcing the gun upward as it discharged, the bullet harmlessly into the air. His left delivered a devastating blow to Jenkins's solar plexus, doubling the man over. The other 2 men rushed forward. Dahlia seized her chance, diving for her medical bag and extracting the derringer. She aimed it at the pockmarked man, who froze at the sight of the small but deadly weapon. "Don't move," she ordered, her voice hard as steel. Lucas had wrenched the revolver from Jenkins's grasp and now held it on the 3rd man who had belatedly drawn his own weapon. "Drop it," Lucas commanded, "or your friend gets a bullet." For a tense moment, Dahlia thought the standoff would end in bloodshed. Then slowly the third man lowered his gun to the ground. "Kick it away," Lucas instructed, and the man complied. "Now, all of you on your knees, hands behind your heads." With Jenkins still gasping for breath and the other two clearly reassessing their chances, they obeyed. Lucas quickly retrieved their weapons, tucking them into his belt. "Dahlia," he said without taking his eyes off the men, "can you bring the horses closer? There's rope in my saddlebag." Working together, they bound the three men securely. Once they were restrained, Lucas checked their bonds one final time before turning to Dahlia. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. She nodded, though her hands were shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. "I'm fine." "You moved so quickly I've never seen anything like it." A grim smile touched his lips. "War teaches you things, not all of them pleasant." He glanced at the three captives. "We need to get them to Sheriff Dawson." They loaded the men onto their own horses, securing them so they couldn't attempt escape. Lucas led two of the horses while Dahlia took the third, and they made their way back to Silver Creek with their prisoners in tow. Sheriff Dawson was astounded to see them ride into town with Jenkins and his accomplices. "Well, I'll be damned," he exclaimed as they explained what had happened. "Thornton, that was either the bravest or the most foolhardy thing I've heard in years." "Wasn't much choice in the matter," Lucas replied, his hand unconsciously finding Dahlia's. "They found us, not the other way around." The sheriff's eyes took in their linked hands and a knowing smile touched his weathered face. "Well, you two make quite a team." "Dr. Atwood, you sure you're all right? That must have been quite an ordeal." "I'm fine, Sheriff," Dahlia assured him, though she didn't release Lucas's hand. "Thanks to Lucas." After giving their statements and seeing the prisoners securely locked in the town jail, Lucas walked Dahlia back to her home. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. They hadn't spoken much since returning to town, both processing the events of the afternoon. At her door, Dahlia finally turned to face him. "That wasn't quite the peaceful picnic you planned," she said, attempting a smile. "No," Lucas agreed, his expression serious. "Dahlia, when I saw those men looking at you the way Jenkins threatened you." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "I've never been so frightened in my life, not for myself but for you." The raw emotion in his voice touched something deep within her. "I was scared too," she admitted, "but not as scared as I should have been because you were there." She hesitated, then added softly, "You protected me." "I'd protect you with my life," Lucas said simply. "But you were pretty impressive yourself, drawing that derringer. Remind me never to underestimate you." A genuine smile curved Dahlia's lips. "That would be wise." Lucas stepped closer, his hands gently framing her face. "May I kiss you, Dahlia Atwood?" Her heart raced, but not from fear this time. "Yes," she whispered. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle yet firm, restrained yet filled with promise. Dahlia found herself responding with unexpected fervor, her hands rising to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her palm. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you," he confessed. "I know it's fast, perhaps too fast, but after today, life's too short not to speak the truth." Dahlia closed her eyes, savoring the closeness. "I'm falling too," she admitted, "and it terrifies me." Lucas pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "Why?" "Because I've never needed anyone before," she said. "I've always been self-sufficient, independent. The thought of caring this much for someone, of being vulnerable." She shook her head. "It's frightening." "Love isn't about needing someone," Lucas said gently. "It's about choosing them again and again, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." His words resonated within her, settling something that had been unsettled. "You're wiser than you look, Cowboy," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. Lucas laughed, the sound warm in the gathering dusk. "Don't let it get around. I have a reputation to maintain." The weeks that followed were the happiest of Dahlia's life. Lucas called on her regularly, fitting his visits around her work schedule with considerate ease. He never complained when emergencies interrupted their plans. sometimes even accompanying her on urgent calls to outlying farms, lending his strength and calm presence. The town quickly grew accustomed to seeing them together. There were a few raised eyebrows and whispers at first, the lady doctor and the newcomer cowboy, but these soon gave way to acceptance and even approval as people witnessed the evident respect and affection between them. As winter descended on Silver Creek, bringing with it early snowfalls and bitter cold, Lucas rented a small cabin closer to town so he wouldn't be stranded at the Mason Ranch during bad weather. The real reason, they both knew, was to be nearer to Dahlia. On Christmas Eve, Dahlia invited Lucas to dinner at her home. She'd spent the day cooking, wanting everything to be perfect. The small house was warm and cheerful, decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, a fire crackling in the hearth. Lucas arrived bearing gifts: a handsome leather medical bag to replace her worn one, and a small, intricately carved wooden box that he'd made himself. When she opened it, she found a delicate silver chain with a small pendant in the shape of a heart. "It's beautiful," she breathed, lifting it from the box. "It was my mother's," Lucas said. "The only piece of jewelry she kept when times were hard. She gave it to me before she died, said I should give it to the woman who captured my heart." He took her hands in his. "That's you, Dahlia, only you." Tears welled in her eyes. "Lucas, I don't deserve such a precious gift." He shook his head, his expression tender yet determined. "She said, I don't deserve you," the cowboy answered. "You deserve everything." He cupped her face in his hands. "Everything I have to give is yours. My heart, my future, my life, if you'll have them." Dahlia realized he was proposing there in her small parlor on Christmas Eve. Joy bubbled up within her, bright and unstoppable as a mountain spring. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and sure. "Yes, I'll have them. And everything I am is yours in return." The kiss they shared sealed the promise, deep and sweet and full of tomorrow. They were married in the spring, when the wildflowers dotted the prairie with color. The whole town turned out for the celebration, from Sheriff Dawson to old Mrs. Wilkins, from Dahlia's patients to Lucas's fellow ranch hands. Even Lucas's sister came from St. Louis with her family to witness her brother's happiness. Lucas continued working at the Mason Ranch, but he also helped Dahlia expand her practice, building an addition to the clinic for recovering patients and eventually constructing a proper home for them on the edge of town, with room for children and visitors. Dahlia never gave up medicine, and Lucas never asked her to. He took pride in her work, supporting her through difficult cases and celebrating her successes. When their first child was born, a daughter with Lucas's storm-gray eyes, he was by her side, his steady presence a comfort through the difficult labor. As the years passed, Silver Creek grew, and so did the Thornton family. They faced challenges together: drought years that threatened the ranch, a typhoid outbreak that tested Dahlia's skills and endurance, the normal trials of raising children in the still Wild West. But through it all, they remained partners in the truest sense, their love deepening with each passing season. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their 3 children playing in the yard, Dahlia leaned against Lucas's shoulder. "Do you remember what you said to me when you proposed?" she asked. Lucas smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "I said you deserved everything. And you've given me everything," she said softly, "more than I ever dreamed possible." He turned to kiss her, his love as strong and steady as it had been on that Christmas Eve a decade before. "We've built it together, Dahlia. That's the greatest gift of all." As the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Dahlia knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world not just as a doctor, but as a wife, a mother, a partner to this remarkable man who had ridden into her life and changed it forever. In the wild and often unforgiving landscape of the American West, they had created something rare and precious. A love built on respect, trust, and the courage to choose each other, day after day, through whatever life brought their way. It was, Dahlia reflected as Lucas's hand found hers in the gathering dusk, everything she could have wished for and more than she had ever believed she deserved.